The illusion of progress, why representation without power fails. Black women in corporate America. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I want to begin by acknowledging the extraordinary mind whose insights form the foundation of this talk. S. Sherrard is not just an analyst or commentator. They are a truth teller whose unflinching commitment to reality has transformed how thousands understand the landscape for Black women in corporate America. In a world drowning in comfortable narratives and premature celebrations, S. Sherrard stands as a beacon of clarity, cutting through the fog of false progress with precision and courage that frankly takes my breath away. What makes their perspective so invaluable is their refusal to accept symbolic victories as substitutes for structural change. They've dedicated their life to exposing the gap between what we say we value and what our systems actually produce. And today I want to share what I learned from our conversation, a conversation that fundamentally altered how I understand power, progress, and the dangerous comfort of illusion. We love success stories, don't we? We celebrate when barriers are broken. We point to firsts as evidence that the system works, that merit eventually triumphs, that patience pays off. These stories make us feel good. They reassure us that justice is being served, that progress is inevitable. But what if these individual success stories are masking a more troubling reality? Here's a fact that stopped me in my tracks during my conversation with S. Sherrard. Despite being among the most active participants in the U.S. labor force, Black women are facing unprecedented setbacks in 2025, not just in job losses, but in pay and advancement opportunities as well. Even as we celebrate the record highs for women CEOs on the Fortune 500 list, only two of these leaders are Black women. Two out of 55 female CEOs out of 500 total positions. Let that sink in for a moment. Two, this isn't just a statistic, it's a revelation that challenges everything we've been told about steady progress. It exposed how systemic barriers persist even at the highest levels of corporate America. Let me be clear about something. This isn't about diminishing anyone's individual achievements. The two Black women who have reached these heights, including Thasunda Brown Duckett at TIA, have accomplished something extraordinary. Their talent, persistence, and leadership are beyond question. But their exceptionalism doesn't solve the structural problem. In fact, it might be obscuring it. When we celebrate these rare successes without acknowledging the broader pattern, we're participating in what I call the illusion of progress, the comforting belief that things are steadily improving when the data tells us otherwise. Consider this shocking reality. In April 2025 alone, Black women lost over 106,000 jobs. This happened while the overall economy added 170,000 jobs. Let that sink in. During a period of economic growth, one specific demographic group experienced devastating losses. This isn't random, it's not coincidental, it's structural. What S. Sherrard helped me understand is that we're witnessing a perfect storm. The rollback of diversity initiatives since early 2024 left many Black women without institutional advocates inside major firms, just as economic headwinds hit hardest. When companies needed to make cuts, guess who was disproportionately affected? The conventional wisdom says that a rising tide lifts all boats. But what if some boats are deliberately anchored down? What if some boats have holes that were never repaired? What if some people weren't given boats at all? This brings me to the wage gap, another area where the numbers tell a troubling story. According to research highlighted by S. Sherrard, full-time working Black women earn just 69 cents for every dollar earned by white men nationwide. In some states, it's less than half. What's particularly disturbing is that this gap doesn't narrow with experience or education. It actually grows wider. The longer Black women stay in the workforce, the further behind they fall in relative terms. This defies our basic assumptions about how careers should progress. We're taught that experience brings value, that loyalty is rewarded, that expertise commands higher compensation. Yet for Black women, the rules of the game appear fundamentally different. Let's talk about the Sunda Brown Duckett for a moment. Her journey to becoming CEO of TIAA included roles at JP Morgan Chase, where she was often the first or the only woman or person of color at her level. At TIAA, she's focused on internal talent development, mentorship programs for underrepresented employees, and advocating publicly for systemic change across corporate America. Her leadership has helped set new standards for inclusive leadership pipelines within her organization and inspired other companies to re examine their executive succession planning practices. She's promoted internal candidates to senior roles and launched initiatives aimed at closing wealth gaps through financial literacy programs targeting marginalized communities. This is what real leadership looks like. But here's the problem: we can't expect the two Black women CEOs in the Fortune 500 to fix a system that was designed to exclude them. The burden of transformation cannot rest solely on those who have been most harmed by existing structures. What's happening in corporate America reflects a broader pattern that S. Sherrard identified. We confuse symbolic representation with actual structural change. We point to the few who've broken through as evidence that the system works, rather than acknowledging how exceptional and exceptionally difficult their journeys have been. This pattern shows up in how we talk about diversity in the workplace. Companies celebrate hiring milestones without addressing retention problems. They announce ambitious goals without changing the cultures that drive talented people away. They create diversity initiatives that focus on entry level recruitment but ignore the barriers to advancement. The result? A leaky pipeline where Black women enter organizations but don't progress at the same rates as their peers. They face what researchers call the concrete ceiling, not just a glass ceiling that can be seen through and eventually shattered, but a barrier that's opaque and seemingly impenetrable. When the economy contracted in April 2025, this structural vulnerability was exposed. Black women lost jobs at rates far exceeding other groups because they were concentrated in positions with less security, less protection, and less institutional power. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. In response to these devastating job losses, community based support networks emerged. These networks offered career counseling tailored specifically to displaced professional Black women. Advocacy groups pushed employers to reconsider recent cuts. Grassroots campaigns brought attention all the way up to federal policymakers. These efforts shifted media narratives around economic recovery, challenging the idea that all boats rise equally, and forced a conversation about who benefits from economic rebounds. Some companies even reinstated targeted hiring efforts after public scrutiny. Similarly, in response to persistent pay gaps, organizations like the National Partnership for Women and Families pressed employers to publish transparent salary bands and commit publicly to closing pay gaps through annual audits. Some states adopted stronger pay equity laws requiring disclosure and reporting by large employers regarding race and gender wage data. These advocacy efforts resulted in several multinational corporations revisiting their compensation structures company-wide starting in late 2024. They set new benchmarks industry-wide regarding transparency and accountability around compensation practices affecting millions across sectors. What these responses demonstrate is something profound that S. Sherrard emphasized throughout our conversation. Change doesn't come from waiting for existing systems to evolve naturally. It comes from deliberate, organized pressure applied strategically at multiple levels. This brings me to what I believe is the most important insight from my conversation with S. Sherrard. Representation at the top is not enough. While more women are breaking into CEO roles than ever before, Black women's representation remains critically low. True equity requires not just visibility, but meaningful inclusion and pathways to leadership. The presence of two Black women CEOs in the Fortune 500 matters. It matters tremendously, but it doesn't solve the structural problems that keep thousands of equally talented Black women from advancing. It doesn't address the systemic undervaluing of their contributions. It doesn't protect them from being disproportionately affected when companies contract. What we need is not just representation, but redistribution of opportunity, of resources, of power. This means moving beyond diversity initiatives that focus solely on hiring and toward comprehensive approaches that address retention, advancement, compensation, and culture. It means holding leaders accountable not just for who gets in the door, but for who thrives once they're inside. It means acknowledging that neutral policies often produce discriminatory outcomes in systems built on historical inequities. As S. Sherrard so powerfully articulated during our conversation, we need to shift from symbolic change to structural transformation. We need to move from celebrating exceptional individuals to creating environments where excellence can flourish regardless of identity. We need to stop mistaking a few success stories for systemic progress. This isn't just about fairness, though fairness matters deeply. It's about unlocking the full potential of our organizations and our economy. When talented people are systematically undervalued and excluded, we all lose. We lose their innovations, their perspectives, their contributions. We lose the better future they might have helped create. So I leave you with this challenge today. Refuse the comfort of the illusion. Demand the discomfort of the truth. When you see celebration of a first or only, ask why there aren't seconds and thirds and tenths. When you hear about representation, ask about power. When you witness symbolic change, push for structural transformation. The systems we've built weren't designed by accident, and they won't be transformed by accident either. They require our deliberate attention, our uncomfortable questions, and our relentless pressure. They require us to distinguish between the appearance of progress and its reality. The question isn't whether Black women are capable of leading our most powerful institutions. The two who have broken through have answered that question definitively. The question is whether our institutions are capable of valuing Black women's leadership at scale. And that question remains painfully open. What will you do tomorrow to help close that gap? What power will you share? What comfort will you sacrifice? What truth will you speak? Our future depends on your answer. Thank you.